your trusted source for information on the energy transition. This is the Insider's Guide to Energy podcast.
That's the primary question that I think your viewers need to think of. Today, we make the metal and we provide what we call ingots, right? Ingots are big blocks of lithium metal, anywhere between 3 to 5 kilograms each, that somebody, who wants to make these foils puts into a machine. They are extruded out of the machine, then they are rolled to a certain thickness, right? But this extrusion and rolling has a limitation in that they can go as thin as 25-30 microns, but typically used for 100 to 200 micron thick foils, right? The challenge is lithium, as you stretch it, starts to tear, starts to rip, so it is difficult to make a very uniform foil. What we do, or this technology with vapor deposition does, is you start from the bottom up, right? So you are depositing on a substrate of copper or polymer and then building your way up. So the reason why we say 2 micron is you want a uniform deposit without any pinpricks or holes on your copper. So what we have noticed is we can do all the way from 0, but you don't get a uniform coat, right? Around 2 micron is where you're getting a uniform surface. And beyond that, up to 20 microns is cost effective. Beyond 20 microns, it starts to get more expensive.
Yes and no. I hate people who say that, but I'm going to say it. Yes and no. So one of the beauties of the fact that we've got ScotWind licensing round is that we know that we have to double, triple our port capacity to deploy all the kit that's going to be part of these developments. We have an enormous amount of ports in Scotland. Many of them may be working at under capacity of what they possibly could. So we're having to invest in those ports and increase the capacity for those ports to deploy all the kit for ScotWind. But the beauty of that is that once that's all deployed, there will be certain ports, which will be the ports where the crews go out and maintain them. But there'll be others that will then have the capacity to do something else with their port side infrastructure there. And the production of hydrogen has been factored into that already. So if I take the Aberdeen South Harbour, which is a new port that's just opened in Aberdeen. We've got our existing harbour, which has done great work for keeping oil and gas supply boats in and out, and all the ferries to the Northern Isles and to Norway, whatever. We've got a South Harbour now, and the South Harbour is huge, but it's also going to have an energy transition zone built right next to it, where we're going to have, a large footprint of hydrogen production there, which is going to be port side. So they're very much factoring in that they could be an exporter of hydrogen there. We've got similar things happening up in Shetland. So we have got the old gas terminal at Sillenvoe. They're starting to look into hydrogen production as well. So, and then we've got the Forth ports as well. We have actually, really interestingly, a domestic hydrogen project in a place called Methil in Fife. Now, Methil is one of the areas of Scotland that there wasn't a just transition for, because it was a coal mining town. It's one of the most deprived parts of Scotland, but they have a massive, almost disused port side that could be developed. H100 is a hydrogen project that is going to give 100% hydrogen to 300 domestic homes as a pilot project for how, and it's going to be electrolyzed on the side of that port, taking the electricity from a wind turbine, and it's going to be a sort of like a demonstrator project for how domestic hydrogen could work. And that's in one of the most deprived areas of Scotland. But I was down there and I was looking at this vast expanse of disused port infrastructure and thinking, this could be developed further. Leith has been developed further just in Edinburgh. So these building blocks are going in place already, mainly to service ScotWind, but they won't have to service ScotWind forever in terms of the actual development. So we're thinking to the future about what they can be used, and hydrogen is one of the main things that people are thinking about.
It's a very good question. And I think it kind of remains to be seen, but there are things to consider. So firstly, the majority of the private companies are targeting electricity generation. And I say that because fusion could actually be used for other things, which is really important, because the energy market, I think about 20% of the energy market is electricity. There's 80% of much more difficult to decarbonize energy use there. And so fusion could actually help to decarbonize some of these other sectors. It produces heat, so you can use that heat to produce electricity, but you could also use it to produce, say, hydrogen and synthetic fuels, or you could use it for desalination, or you could use it for heat for industry, like, provided you can get the temperatures right, for what they need. But the potential is there, and so that's a very interesting thing about fusion in the longer term, because it doesn't just have to tackle the electricity problem, it can really tackle the wider decarbonization problem. But in the short term, in terms of like the first usage of fusion, it will probably be for electricity. Most of the private companies are targeting electricity. And even within that, there are going to be markets that are, let's say, easier than others, because as with any new technology, the first one is probably going to be pretty expensive to build. Like, fusion is very complex. There are some private companies that are working to make simpler designs, but those ones have, the science is earlier stage. So the companies where the science is further down the track, the machines they're building are very complex and they're going to be expensive. So cost is going to be an issue, and obviously the private companies are working to get the costs down as much as possible. But there will be markets where the electricity price is higher, and those will probably be like the best markets to start with. For example, I think places like Singapore and Japan have quite high electricity prices. There may also be opportunities in, for example, remote mines where they need their own power source. So those will probably be the areas that are targeted first. But with the governments getting behind fusion as they are, particularly in the UK and the US, who's to say? It could be that there are policies that are introduced to make it possible. I can't really speak to that right now. We have to wait and see. But yeah, I think we're going to see how it shakes up over the next day.
Yeah, you're touching on a very important point. I mean, for sure, we're talking about we are in terms of size compared to the heads in the company. We're talking about revenues of 300 millions that we have to turn every month. So basically, you need a partner, and therefore the owner of wind energy trading is BKW. So therefore, it's 100% daughter. But they are well aware of the advantages that we have in this market compared to integrating this function completely into their utility-based and very, let's say, well organized, but very, let's say, slower and heavier organization. So the idea is really here to give the renewables what they need in terms of setup and in terms of flexibility and speed and I mean, this market is facing quite some challenges at the moment. So just to mention one is redispatch. So basically, every renewable asset is now integrated into the redispatch system. So it's kind of like you have to. It's like creating a new market from the scratch with all, let's say, problems, and you're doing this in the biggest countries for renewables in Europe. So I haven't mentioned that we're mostly active in Germany, even though we're Swiss-based, just because this is the market where they started. The company Wind Energy Trading, we're starting now with Italy. France will follow soon, but when we need as well a certain setup. So we are only active in markets where we have a single balancing price. And this is the case in UK, and it's the case in Italy now. In France, it's kind of like a trade system. But that means, like in Switzerland, for instance, there is not a single balancing price so far, which is a request from the European Union. But we all know how the discussions are going on this side. but still, like for us, for our know-how, we can only perform when we are on a single balancing market, because at the end, the balancing price is very important and a very important risk factor. And that's why companies are as well, let's say, trying, or an asset owner is trying to secure this risk, because if he gets an invoice at the end of the year or at the end of the month from the grid operator, there are quite some big surprises in there, and he's very happy that he can hedge this risk, basically, and outsource this risk to us and to other specialized companies doing this balancing risk hedging or direct marketing, or however you want to call it. And one more point, just to be complete. Wind energy trading is not active directly with assets. So we are a partner of sales companies, or of, let's say, mid-sized companies that are very strong, have a strong regional presence in terms of sales. And then they don't have the 24/7 setup to manage the renewables around the clock themselves. So they partner with us. And so they are the face of the customer. They have the contract with the customer, and we are the partner, white label partner. So the client does, like, it depends on the company if the asset knows about us or not, but you can do it without being known, at least in Germany. In other countries, it's a bit more tricky, but it's as well more and more known to specialize basically these roles, to say, okay, fine, we have, even in a fully integrated utility, you have a sales department and you have a trading department. It's not the same department. It's very rare even that it's the same boss in a utility that is heading the sales team and the trading team for this regard. So basically, we're living this for mid-sized companies, and then the other clients we have is basically utilities that are just for strategic reason, outsource some of the risk to us on a yearly basis, on a 2-year basis. But these are the two, and this is making us so big because we can basically easily get wind farms on. So right now last year we managed 1,500 farms, solar and wind farms in total, 6 gigawatt installed capacity. This year it's a bit less. So I think now I'm done with all aspects around the company.
Well, that's correct, because the pressure that you have in the pipes, say in a city or a town, is controlled by thousands of gas governors. So the gas flows from the higher pressure tiers through a gas governor into the low pressure tiers, which are low pressure pipes, which distribute the gas to the houses. And all those gas governors have a fixed outlet pressure. I mean, they're completely manual. So if you want to adjust the pressure output, you go along there with they're sitting in a kiosk by the side of the road. You open the door, you go in there with a screwdriver, and you adjust the pressure by hand. And the problem with that is that obviously demand varies hugely throughout the year. So on a cold winter morning, you may have about 100 times the demand that you get on a warm summer evening. And if you're going to have enough pressure to deal with the cold winter morning, then you've got to set the governor's pressures very conservatively high. And that means that through the summer, when you've got less demand, or so at night or in the summer, you've got much lower demand, you've got more pressure than you need. And all that excess pressure is creating excess leakage. So, and the bit you mentioned about manual control, well, the way they get over it at the moment is they have seasonal setting. So, the governors will be on a winter setting, and so they'll be set pretty high to make sure they can cover any really extreme demand conditions in the winter peaks. Whenever the first thing in the morning, everyone's central heating goes on, there's a big peak. They've got to have enough pressure going into the network to cover that. So yes, and then when it comes to springtime, things warm up a bit. They don't need that pressure, so they send the whole crew around, thousands of governors, turning the pressure back down again. And then if they're not careful, they turn the pressures down, and then we have a cold snap in April or something, and they have to run around quickly and turn them all back up again. And it can take one network, up to 3 weeks using all their technicians to get around and do this job. So the first thing the autonomy system does is enable them to remotely control all the governors in the network, so they don't have to send people out to go and do it.
Yeah, so typically we're looking at trying to provide useful amounts of power to the grid. So we're talking about hundreds of megawatts or gigawatts of power. So supplying tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of homes or businesses. That kind of power level becomes useful for a space solar power plant. Now, to be able to provide that amount of power, you need to be able to capture that much sunlight in space, which means having really enormous structures, essentially like large solar farms on the Earth, spread out over the landscape. You're putting these up in space. So a few kilometers across, some of the concepts are designed to be in order to be able to capture enough sunlight, convert it to radio frequency, and send it down to the ground. Now, these are humongous structures, of course, for space, because the largest thing we've ever put into orbit as humanity is the International Space Station, which is only about 100 meters across. And we're talking about an order of magnitude or more than that for these large space solar power plants. And therein lies the challenge to be able to launch all these parts that have to be put together in space, because of course you can't launch it on a single launcher, and then operate it as a single large entity to be able to point safely and accurately this beam down to the ground. Typically, the designs look at putting these in orbits pretty high up. So geostationary orbit, for example, is a good place if you want to provide 24/7 power to a receiver down on the ground, a fixed location with the satellite rotating at the same rate as the Earth. However, there are other ways you can think of this by putting satellites in lower orbits, smaller satellites, and having a constellation of them, which can provide a different kind of energy service. They don't have to be. In fact, the low Earth orbit is probably not the best place to put such satellites, because they fly over a particular point too quickly. So you don't get to spend much time delivering power before you are passing, below the horizon again. Plus, the orbital debris environment is quite challenging in low Earth orbit. You've heard a lot about space debris that is worst down in low orbits, and it's starting to get a little bit busy with all these large constellations of telecommunication satellites as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually, probably uniquely within the sector, we actually have got a number of our interfaces that we provide the source code for on GitHub. So if anybody wants to get started with writing their own applications, then they can do that. They can take the source code that we've got as an example for maybe a different interface, and then they can just take that and use that to write their own similar interface. So it's innovations like that that we're kind of bringing to the fore that, ultimately just make the platform more flexible. And of course, people always want to do their own stuff, right? And with the API and the code samples and it just all being very standardized, yeah, absolutely. You can definitely write your own stuff to go alongside the standardized components.